Welcome back to Day 2 of Creating Energy Northern Resources Conference with our presenting sponsor, Tourmaline. We're honored to be coming to you from the lands of the Denezois people where we get to live, work, and play. My name is Cheryl Montgomery, and I'm the CEO for the Fort St. John and District Chamber of Commerce. The Fort St. John District Chamber of Commerce is thrilled with the response to grow this annual event with all the help of all of our sponsors and speakers. Yesterday, we had a day filled with great conversations with Stuart Meir and many other of our speakers, top leaders in the oil and gas industry and First Nations, discussing the path forward for reconciliation and economic sustainability. Today, we will hear about reconciliation on a different level. We hear lots about involving land and industry, but what does it mean to small businesses and communities? How do they get involved? We will have a discussion coming up first about how communities are embracing urban reserves and community reconciliation. And this afternoon, we will have some incredible presenters discussing clean energy and new innovations happening in the energy production section. I look forward to that. To kickstart today, I would like to introduce Kyle Giddens, who is the Project Director of Public Affairs with TC Energy, and Kyle's joining us now to introduce our presenter. Welcome, Kyle.
Well, thank you very much, Cheryl, and good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Kyle Giddens. I'm the Public Affairs Director for British Columbia for TC Energy and Coastal GasLink project. And I know many of you are joining from the Peace region on the Treaty 8 traditional territory, but for many other territories across BC and Alberta, but I am located in Prince George on the territory of the Lheidli T'enneh. I've had the privilege of working on the Coastal GasLink project for over 9 years now, and really the most rewarding part for me has been the ability to build relationships and learn from community partners and businesses like those at this conference. And I know my colleague, Heather Desarmi, is in our Fort St. John office, and she was able to engage at the Boreal Gardens last night, and she'll be there at dinner at the Lido tonight. So please do connect with Heather and network and build that relationship. I'm sorry I can't join. I was out in Kitimat already this week on the project, so I had to get home, tend to dad duty here. Our team is really here to connect with communities across the north, though. So we spend a lot of our time on the road across Highway 16 and 97 on Coastal GasLink, trying to just continue to build out relationships. We've been in construction for almost 3.5 years now, and we're now 65% complete on the Coastal GasLink project. This year, we'll actually have over 6,000 workers across the north this summer. So massive opportunity and business connections being made. And most of you have heard about the challenges and even controversy and even protests surrounding Coastal GasLink. It hasn't deterred us from our commitment to leave a legacy of safety and respect for all people, communities, and the environment. And that's a commitment that started nearly 10 years ago now. And since that time, we've worked together to identify a path towards mutually beneficial relationships. These relationships have led to the creation of unprecedented agreements of support from all 20 Indigenous communities along our project corridor. And in March, we were proud to announce that TC Energy had signed option agreements to sell up to a 10% equity interest in Coastal GasLink to First Nations along this corridor. This is one way we can continue to inspire and advance reconciliation. We have shared values and interest in constructing this project in a manner that integrates environmental stewardship, and we have more milestones to come and look forward to continuing our work really on this big year of construction that we have on the project. The project has been providing these economic opportunities across the north, but it's more than that. There's an opportunity to try to build major projects better than they've actually been done before. So for us, success is more about just getting the job done, building the pipeline. It means building a project the Canadians can be proud of with safety at the forefront, a project that emphasizes environmental sustainability both here at home and in the big picture globally as part of an LNG value chain that reduces global emissions, and a project that represents respects each and every individual, whether they're working on the project or they're in neighboring communities. this is the legacy that we want to leave when construction of Coastal GasLink is completed. And I want to thank the Fort St. John Chamber team for organizing this fantastic conference. I'm a big believer in the power of the Chamber network, and indeed served as president of the Prince George Chamber for the last 2 years. They're not rid of me quite yet. I'm still clinging on as past pres these days. And today I get to introduce our CEO of the Prince George Chamber, Todd Corrigall. So I technically was his boss for 2 years, but I think he was really the one driving the bus for that entire time. Todd and I got to work closely together on some big things to support small businesses through the pandemic. We jointly advocated for a safe and healthy community during big challenges like the opioid crisis, among many other projects. But what I think I'm most proud of is our work on advancing reconciliation with our host First Nation. And I know Todd will speak on relationship building to that effect. For those at this conference, the business community certainly does have a role in economic reconciliation, and it's right in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. Chambers can show that leadership and show that leadership to help their members. And I know a lot of chambers, including Fort St. John, have been expanding the conversation in the business community on equality and diversity and inclusion, important conversations. So with that, I'll introduce Todd as our speaker this morning. Prior to joining the Prince George Chamber of Commerce in January of 2018, Todd Corrigall spent the previous 15 years in government and media, working in a variety of leadership capacities. He's focused on strategic development, partner engagement, and greater public participation. Todd has worked with municipalities, provinces, and all 3 territorial governments and the Senate. As a former business owner and consultant, Todd is a strong advocate for local business, reducing barriers to entry, and sustaining a vibrant and diverse business ecosystem in Prince George. A born and raised Torontonian, and deservedly so, a long-suffering Leafs fan, Todd has spent the last 18 years in Western Canada. We've been glad to have him in Prince George, where he and his wife are raising their young daughter. So please join me in welcoming Todd Corrigall.
Well, thanks so much, Kyle. And we don't have to look much further than the playoffs just recently, as the Leafs bottomed out again in the first round, to see my long-suffering saga. But I greatly appreciate Kyle's introduction and his leadership. As he noted, he was president of our chamber board for the last 2 years, with his term just ending in April of this year. Kyle stepped up. And we jokingly say we were probably the 2 most tired chamber people in all the land, as he was raising his second child and our daughter was born almost simultaneously. So I'm incredibly grateful for Kyle's leadership in our community and his leadership within Coastal GasLink and the pipeline project. When we talk about the value of partnerships, TC Energy and the Coastal GasLink pipeline project have been tremendous partners throughout the North, and we wouldn't be where we are today without them, without their support. And without the historic levels of engagement done on that project throughout the regions that they service. So much like Kyle, I'm pleased to be joining you today from the traditional territory of the Lheidli T'enneh people. I also wish I could have joined you in Fort St. John. Cheryl, who's such a great advocate for Fort St. John in that region, asked me to do this and asked me if I could come up to Fort St. John. We're in the process of moving our offices right now because we strongly believe that we'll condense as much stuff as we can into a 2-week time period. So True North, the BC Chamber of Commerce AGM and conference, and then moving our office immediately following. So I apologize I can't be there in person, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss what we're doing and what we have been doing. And Kyle is very gracious with not taking a lot of credit for where we are today. But we are where we are because of his leadership and because of the leadership people like Kyle will exemplify throughout BC, particularly when we talk about Indigenous reconciliation and economic reconciliation for Indigenous communities. So we started this process several years ago. We started a process by engaging with our local First Nations and discussing where they were today and where they wanted to be in a couple of years from now. Better understanding the value chain of businesses, the supply that we create, the businesses that First Nations communities continue to create, and how we can come together in a more holistic manner, working together to better our communities. When the pandemic hit, it wasn't just local businesses that were suffering. It was the businesses that were run through our Indigenous communities that were being hit incredibly hard as well. So along with Kyle in the president's chair, we started to discuss ways in which we could make an impactful change through this. And of course, at that point, the 215 children or young lives in Kamloops were discovered. That certainly expedited our process greatly because we needed to rationalize how we could play a role in reconciliation as quickly as possible while still working on a larger framework going forward. With that, we were invited to a lunch with a member, and we knew that Chief and one of her counselors were going to be present. And we made the determination that making a blanket statement about reconciliation, while important, was not a meaningful first step in our eyes. In our eyes, the meaningful first step was looking for the opportunity to incorporate our local First Nations into everything that we do. And we do that by making them a member of our chamber. And we do that by giving them a lifetime membership to our chamber. So we drafted a letter that we provided to Chief Logan and Councillor Bouzas at that lunch, which essentially indicated our desire to move our conversations forward, to expand our discussions and looking for avenues to create greater synergies. And we extended the offer to retain a lifetime membership in the Prince George Chamber of Commerce so that we ensured the voice of the Lheidli T'enneh and their subsidiary businesses were included in everything that we did. We were incredibly happy when we heard back from Chief and Council a little while later that expressed their interest in accepting that offer, and also extended the invitation to sit down for a meal and have a broader discussion. What was incredibly powerful about this moment was Chief Logan's approach to this. She wanted things done in such a way that were both professional but informal. They were engaging and inclusive, but there was not any ties that were attached to this immediately. This was an opportunity to get to know one another. This was an opportunity to come together and better understand each other's positions and where true opportunities for engagement may come from. From that initial dinner, we got some ideas about what they might want to see. They had some ideas about what we may want to see. And myself and one of their colleagues began working in the background on what a framework for a partnership agreement could look like. That required a lot of engagement, certainly between myself and my board, and between Chief and her council. And inevitably where we arrived at was a partnership agreement. There had been a bunch of discussions about what the framework for this might look like. And when we settled on a partnership agreement, we settled on that because we felt the greater impacts would come from having autonomy over how we could do things, from having more openness in how discussions could roll. And what we tried to do was not pigeonhole ourselves into encumbering issues that nobody may want to see down the road. So it's a fairly vague document, but it's a very powerful document at the same time. This has been structured in such a way that we make sure the Lheidli T'enneh are included in everything that we do. In fact, they were gracious enough, Chief Logan herself was gracious enough to give us a Lheidli T'enneh flag at the True North event back on June 2nd that LNG Canada provides a great level of partnership for us with. That flag will now fly at Prince George Chamber of Commerce events. That flag will now stay in our office spaces as a mark of this partnership and the importance and value of this partnership. We are including Chief and her council in a number of events that we do. We are putting a framework in place right now to begin building a business in Prince George focused document. We're very fortunate here that we benefit from major projects. We don't have major projects based in Prince George, but we have every offshoot industry that supports all the tremendous work that everybody else does in the province through major projects. So while Canfor has a huge presence here, while Coastal GasLink has a presence here, while Artemis Blackwater has a huge presence here, those projects aren't operating within the confines of the city of Prince George, but we benefit from that. And First Nations will benefit from that too. And so when we look at the reciprocal benefits of economic reconciliation throughout our community, it's the value chain piece of ensuring that everybody understands how this moves forward, how we can benefit from working on this together, and what we can do when we are working as one together. It will, we hope, create an environment where business is looking to come to Prince George, where business is looking to come to the north, where business is looking to establish major projects similar to the Coastal GasLink pipeline project, understand the value chain of engaging early and often with our Indigenous communities, how chambers of commerce can help bridge those discussions very early on in the process, and how we can look to move these programs and projects forward at a much greater clip. We know that environmental processes and reviews will take a much longer time, and that's fine. We can expedite processes where we can help expedite processes, and that's a strong role that chambers of commerce can play. When we look at the businesses in this space, I know a number of you are already engaged with your chambers. I know a number of you are already engaged with your local First Nations. When we talk about strategic partnerships, the value of being able to bring all of those parties together very early and very often in these processes, I think is where we see direct benefit and where we will see long-term ease in ensuring the future viability of BC's economic foundation, which we all know is the resource industry. So on that note, partnerships is the big framework for this. The Prince George Chamber, as the Fort St. John Chambers as well, are all partners with the BC Chamber of Commerce. We're all part of a large network here in BC that works as collaboratively as possible to do what's best for the economy of all British Columbians. And so I'm excited that Fiona Famulak, the President and CEO from the BC Chamber of Commerce, is with us today to hold my feet to the fire for once. So Fiona.
Sorry, had a little blip there myself. You know, it's the unmuting is just never going to end in my life, right? We were talking yesterday that probably on my tombstone will say muted forever now, you know, because that's where we're at. Thanks so much, Todd, for that. And I just want to jump on briefly for a quick second and introduce everybody to Fiona Famulak, who Todd mentioned. Fiona is the President and CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce and our fierce leader to our organization, as Todd mentioned. So I really want to thank her for participating in this conversation. She's going to carry that on with Todd. And I just wanted to mention thank you to Todd for that and welcome Fiona.
Thank you, Cheryl, and good morning, everybody. I'm speaking with you today from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. And as an immigrant to Canada, I absolutely acknowledge that Indigenous peoples have always been here. We all have a role to play in reconciliation, and I'm incredibly grateful to live, work, and play on their lands. And Cheryl, I'm sorry that I can't be with you in Fort St. John. Like Todd, that was going to be my original idea. It was my idea, but unfortunately, COVID-19 got the better of me, and I'm still picking up from where I left off about a week ago. So, but very happy to be here virtually. Todd, thank you for your keynote comments there. Really fascinating summary of where you've landed already, and really showing great leadership by signing the partner agreement with the Klikle First Nations. My question to you, I want to go back to one of your opening comments about the conversation started a while ago, and I think was probably expedited by COVID and the impact on all businesses, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, as a result of the pandemic. Just for context, what has been the time period from the original idea to reach out to Klikle to have the conversation to where you've landed today?
Yeah, great question. And it goes back quite a long way. I would say probably closer to 3-4 years. So this has long been a discussion between myself and many people attending this will know who Kevin Brown is, He's deeply involved with First Nations communities throughout BC, particularly in the north. And Kevin and I have talked a lot about what the future of Indigenous reconciliation and economic reconciliation looks like. And so a really good opening conversation was struck between Kevin and I in January 2019 at the BC Natural Resources Forum in Prince George. And it was a conversation that was both eye-opening, but a very good jumping off point for where we could go. We started to recognize that a lot of the synergies existed in how we wanted to move forward, how the Lheidli T'enneh might want to move forward, and recognize that without a direct conversation between the two parties, we weren't going to advance anything. So what we needed to do was start a process. And certainly that process started in the background for everybody, trying to understand what we could accomplish and what we could bring forward. So this is not slapped together or fly by night. This has been a fairly long process in internal discussion and rationalization and understanding what role we could 100% commit to in any type of agreement.
Mm-hmm. It's all about building relationship, right? It's all about building that foundation, and if the foundation is strong, then what comes will be strong. Where if it's shaky or slapped together, then it isn't going to work. So it's all about communication and relationship. You use the term that the partnership agreement is vague and powerful, which I love that. Vague and powerful, like an oxymoron almost. What are you able to share some of the details of the tenets of the agreement, just to give us an idea of what it covers?
Yeah, certainly. So when I say vague and powerful, it's purposefully built around being a bit of an oxymoron. It's vague in the sense that there's a great deal of growth potential that's there, and powerful from the standpoint that this is not commonplace in the rest of Canada, nor in the rest of BC.
Mm-hmm.
So powerful that, ourselves and a few other chambers in BC have been at the forefront of some pretty evocative change here. So when we look at some of the smaller parts of this, inclusion of the Lheidli T'enneh in all of our events is one of the big pieces. Biannual meeting of Chief Counsel and our board and senior staff is another major component to this. Land acknowledgements, obviously a very important piece. Working in lockstep with the Economic Development Agency within the nation to assure that we're aligning not just the needs of Prince George and Prince George businesses, but the needs of the Lheidli T'enneh and their territory, so that once we get to a place where the doing business in Prince George documentation is available and live, we are in a place where we can start directing how we bring businesses into our community, how we allow them to be successful from day one in those relationships and partnerships, and how we all move forward together. And I think that is probably one of the most powerful and purposefully vague pieces to this partnership agreement, because it will create a significant framework for the next number of decades.
It's a magnet. I think it really feeds into well, first of all, it's the right thing to do. It's absolutely the right thing to do as part of our reconciliation journey. So thank you for your leadership on that front, and to all the parties involved over the last few years. I also think it adds to the Prince George brand, to signal to not just British Columbia and Canada, but to the world that this community is open for business, and looking to attract all partners, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. It's interesting. It's a conversation that I've sometimes had with the provincial government. We have to signal what it is that we believe in, and it's not just words. It needs to be through our actions. So congratulations on the work that you've achieved so far. I know there's a long ways to go. To the municipalities in the audience, Todd, to the chambers of commerce in the audience, what is your message to them in terms of how to begin the conversation with their Indigenous partners, how important it is to begin the conversation with those partners?
That is such a challenging question, and I'm going to answer that, and I'm going to jump back to something else you said as well. So how do you engage in this discussion? You have to appreciate that every nation is going to be different. Every chief and council is going to be different. You know, we ended up in a very amiable position. Chief Logan and her council are not only young and ambitious, they are eager to see values back to their nation and their communities as well. So the value proposition for this council, and I don't want to put words into their mouth, I believe was furthering their economic position and furthering their brand position as well. And so this became an opportunity to look at the largest and broadest based business organization in BC and here in Prince George for a value-based discussion. So when we look to other communities and how they can begin this process, you noted it in some of your remarks. This is a relationship first process. Engage with the local First Nation. If you have a relationship with the chief or with a member of council, engage with them. If you don't, reach out to their executive director, reach out to one of their senior staff members, and get a pulse on what availability might look like. Is there an opportunity to bring coffee in at the close of a council meeting? Is there an opportunity to sit down for a meal somewhere and share some thoughts and some experiences? It has to be relationship driven. It has to come from a very honest and sincere place. You know, we hear a lot about leadership and leadership challenges, particularly in today's ecosystem. And authentic leaders are the ones who are always going to be successful. It may not be today and it may not be tomorrow, but if you're authentic and genuine in your approach, that will resonate through, that will be understood, and that will be graciously accepted. So I would say, make sure you are in a position where you definitively want to go down this road, where you're ready to have some tough conversations, where you're ready to have some real conversations. And when you get to that place, recognize that you have to start building that relationship. And that process is going to take some time. I do just want to step back to something that you said about doing business in BC and the value base of this. And I'm going to speak a little more broadly on sort of northern topics at this point. We are in a very strategic place here in the north. We are not encumbered by the mountains, by the ocean. We have space to grow. We have space to expand. As much as locally and in other communities, we will talk a lot about the challenges of home ownership, the escalating price. Everything is on the increase right now. People in the Lower Mainland and businesses in the Lower Mainland would argue that a $900,000 condo doesn't compare to a $400,000 house or a $600,000 house. And so there's huge opportunities for northern communities to begin leveraging both the talent and the businesses that are located in the Lower Mainland. And when Fiona notes talking to the province about these issues, the province also has to recognize that the Lower Mainland and the island are becoming unattainable for lots of people from a cost perspective. So as northern communities, we have a huge leverage opportunity that's at our disposal. And that's engaging with businesses and getting them to relocate some of their operations, some or all of their operations, to the north or to the central interior. There's housing availability, there's land availability, serviced and otherwise. There's room for a wealth of industrial projects. There's room for a wealth of construction projects. And if we are all working towards economic reconciliation and relationships with our Indigenous communities, that is something that sends a very strong signal to these individuals and businesses in the Lower Mainland that we're that much further ahead than they are right now, and that there's a greater opportunity to be partners up in the north.
Absolutely. Well said. And if I can build on that, I think it's and I speak to the provincial government a lot, and remind us all that we are one economy. Yes, there's a north and a south, but at the end of the day, the folks in the south are impacted by the good work that's happening in the north. The north has the land base and the economic impetus to really set BC apart from its competition, to set us up to succeed economically, all of us, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. It has the ability to drive the economic success of Canada and to position us well globally. So there's a lot riding on the north, and we need to get the word out. We need to help people understand that the amount of potential in the north, the northern regions of British Columbia is immense. And to your point, Todd, around there's space, there's housing. Yes, there's certainly some infrastructural pieces that we need to address, whether it's connectivity, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's healthcare and access to childcare, and in order to be able to attract people to the north. But those things are, I think, solvable because the opportunity is greater. But we need to resolve those issues. So well said in terms of the importance of the northern regions. I want to go back to a comment that you made about the importance of the relationship, and it reminds me on a comment that was made just in last week or 10 days ago at our AGM and conference about the qualities of leadership required post-COVID. And there was a variety of different qualities that were presented that evening. Trust, though, was named as being the most important of those 6 or 7 qualities. And really what you're speaking to, Todd, is first of all, the courage, which was also one of the qualities, to reach out and have conversations with our Indigenous partners, not wait to be invited. If I think about the comments made by Chief Charlene Gale again and again, it's that they are open to have conversations. Don't be afraid. And to engage in those conversations and begin to build the trust that will be the foundation for the future. So really solid comments, and I think a huge role for our chamber network. You've spoken to it about being the conduit. And being the courageous one, perhaps, to begin conversations and really begin to lay the foundations. I want to just watching the clock here. I just want to turn back to the agreement and what are the short-term and medium-term priorities in your agreement?
Yeah, so from a short-term perspective, it was making sure that we were speaking regularly. Ensuring that the agreement involves that two-way communication, and that as much as we've set up these semi-annual larger sit-downs, that is not the only point of communication. So myself and Kevin, as my sort of direct conduit to the Tl'it'li T'enneh, we speak, probably weekly, but certainly bi-weekly, and have for quite some time. And so we're sharing ideas. He's sharing outcomes from their council meetings. I'm sharing outcomes from our board meetings. I'm also sharing feedback regularly from our members as he's sharing information that he's in a position to share with us as well. So we sort of have these stream of conscious discussions that go on. We also have an incredibly long and redundant email chains that talk a lot about what we could do and what are the opportunities. And ironically, just last week, we were talking about how do we start spreading the message? How do we start talking about what we're doing here in Prince George, and how does that serve other communities, not only in BC, but across the country, who may be looking for similar opportunities, or to your point, may not feel brave or courageous enough to reach out to their First Nations communities. And so I think, we now have a role to play. We've put this in place, and our role to play now is not only in cultivating and building this relationship with our local First Nation, it's cultivating similar relationships across the country. How can we act as leaders both from the Prince George Chamber standpoint and also from the Lheidli-T'enneh standpoint, in reaching out to our respective counterparts elsewhere in the country and building that framework. If little Prince George can be a catalyst for change across the country, what a story that would be to tell. What a story that would be for years to come, for the Lheidli-T'enneh to share with their community members, for the Prince George Chamber to share with our business community, and for BC to share with the rest of the world. I mean, it's a fantastic opportunity. And so that takes us from short term to medium to long.
Absolutely. And again, congratulations and thank you for your leadership, because we represent just shy of 100 chambers of commerce and boards of trade across the province. And to your point earlier, not everybody's at the same stage in their reconciliation journey. Some of us are at the very beginning of our journey. And I'm going to be leaning on yourself and the folks in Nanaimo, for example, who have also done some really good work with their Indigenous partners, and other chambers in the north, who I would argue are further ahead in the reconciliation journey compared to our counterparts here in the south. And I include the BC Chamber in that group too. So we have a lot to learn, and there's a massive information to share. And I think Prince George and Nanaimo and others are in a great position to lead and to bring the rest of us along, so that we're not reinventing the wheel, and that we're building on each other's lessons. What have been the challenges in the journey so far, Todd, and how have you overcome them?
I think the challenges are quite easy to understand, and I mentioned it earlier. You have to be ready for challenging conversations. You have to be ready to sit in a room and be comfortably uncomfortable for several hours at a time, every single time you do it. I was fortunate enough years and years ago when I was in the Northwest Territories working with government. Devolution was happening, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was really going with these survivor stories, and they were accumulating these stories. And a very good friend of mine was one of the people who was scribing some of these stories. And he used to come back from his trips to Vancouver to scribe these stories and explain confidentially what he was experiencing, what he would hear, what it sounded like to him, what the expressions were, and how impactful it was to sit in a room and listen to traumatic story after traumatic story. And reconciliation doesn't happen without hearing about the trauma, without putting yourself in a position to be very sympathetic and empathetic to how that had happened. We don't know, or I personally don't know, as a white man born and raised in Canada, what it means to be racially profiled, what it means to have land or family taken or stripped away from me. Mm-hmm. And I'll never be able to understand that. But what we need to do is uncomfortably put ourselves into situations where we can listen and listen. There's no response that's going to make up for that. Mm-hmm. Everything that we do from the day forward is how we move forward collectively. So it's shocking, it's scary, but real growth in any aspect of your life will only happen when you're willing to put yourself into tremendously uncomfortable situations and be a part of something larger. And so, I don't say it lightly. You need to be prepared personally to be in very uncomfortable situations and assimilate information that, may be very challenging to understand.
Well said. Personally prepared, and also prepared as an organization, which means not just the you and I's who are leading chambers of commerce, for example, or businesses, but our boards of directors who change over on a regular basis. It's an ongoing cycle of education that is required, that is is needed within organizations like ours, and also small, medium, and large businesses, a commitment to learning and to not paying lip service to it at all, but really, as you're saying, putting yourself in a vulnerable position and needing to learn to listen only, and to take what you're learning and apply it in the most constructive, collaborative way to move ourselves forward. Because if we all move forward, we all benefit. That was my 5 minutes to go alarm that just reminded me that I need to keep track here, because my job is to crack the whip and keep.
And I just want to jump in on something you said there, because there's significant value in the role that small businesses will play. And I'll speak very specifically to Prince George. We are a supply community for a lot of the resource projects that go on in and around, forestry included, certainly, because that's how it started. But those businesses are very small operations in the grand scheme of things. They may be multi-million dollar businesses, but they're 4 to 6 people operations. And that's because they're very finite in how they deliver their services. But if there was a significant uprising of small businesses, and when I say small, I mean anywhere from 1 to 20 employees, that wanted to be engaged in a process like this, as we know, BC is not the head office center of Canada. I think we're down to about 6 major head offices in all of BC. We are a small business community. We could be leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of the country if we get our small businesses engaged in this process, and if there's a very, very focused and concerted effort in that field. We would be putting ourselves in such a tremendous economic position for the rest of the country to recognize and hopefully relocate their operations and their people to BC as well, which we all know increasing our tax base only helps all of us.
Absolutely. Quick couple of questions, because we've got 4 minutes left, Todd. Just to go back to that comment then about the role of small and medium businesses in our reconciliation journey. Can you speak to what role small and medium businesses has in the agreement that you have with Clé Clé Tenay? Are there specific roles that you see the business community playing?
So we didn't want to get very prescriptive in that way.
Right.
We wanted to make sure that the partnership was easy to deliver and palatable, and provided opportunities to build on. And so again, it wasn't hyper prescriptive, but what we've done is opened the door for more niche conversation to happen now, and that's our hope. And
that will evolve, absolutely. So in the final minute or two, and I always like to ask this questions of our panelists and speakers, if you had one message that you wanted to share with the audience this morning, what would it be? I don't want to steal Chief Gale's statements, but I'm going to steal Chief Gale's statements. Don't be afraid. Reach out. This all starts with a conversation. It doesn't start by thinking about it or overthinking about it. We only started to move this process forward when we were willing to reach out and have the conversation, have the uncomfortable conversation, and start recognizing the value that comes from this. I've been overwhelmed with the feedback that we've gotten from this. And I know from Kevin, the Clé Clé Tenay has received a great deal of feedback positively on this too. Use us as an example. I'm always happy to talk about this. I'd always take your calls and your emails because the value of this resonating through our communities and our province is long lasting. Don't be afraid. Make the call. Well said. And I will leave you with the closing comment. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership, Todd Corrigall. Thank you also, and congratulations to the Clé Clé Tenay First Nations and the community of Prince George. Thank you, Kyle Giddens, for your opening comments and sponsorship of this session. And with that, at 9:45, I will hand back to Cheryl. Thank you, Cheryl.
What a great conversation. Thank you so much. You know, I just want to say that, Todd, you guys are the leader, and I think that this is going to be the playbook the template for all chambers to follow and to, aspire to. I'd like to think that we're working in this direction already as we invite all of our Indigenous friends and neighbors with Treaty 8 to join us tonight at our Indigenous dinner. But we're going to carry on the conversation. Fiona's going to join us for the next session, and we're going to carry on the conversation about what's happening locally with our urban reserves and with some of the experts that have been involved with that. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. But I know that what you guys have done, Todd and others, is really going to impact some of the work that the Fort St. John Chamber is going to do in the near future. And I also made the comment about vague and powerful. I wrote that down as well. And that's going to be our vision for that as well. So I really want to thank you, Todd, for taking the time. I'm sorry you couldn't come up here. Moving takes precedence, I guess, but we'll let that one go and, sort that out later. And Fiona's going to be back with our next one. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Kyle, for joining us. And we'll see Fiona again in a few minutes on our next session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.